This 90-pound German shepherd was labelled a monster, violently attacking anyone who dared to approach. With his euthanasia scheduled for tomorrow, all hope was lost. But when a quiet, 22-year-old shelter worker knelt before him and her silver necklace made a soft clink, the terrifying beast instantly dropped to the floor, whimpering. A heavily scarred Navy SEAL, watching from the doorway, froze in disbelief. He didn't know that the tiny sound from her chest held a secret that would soon shatter his entire world. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. And if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The morning sun barely reached the concrete walls of the isolation ward at the Sunny Pines Animal Rescue. The air inside smelled of bleach and fear. Chloe stood perfectly still outside cage number 4. She held a metal bowl filled with kibble and a generous portion of boiled chicken. Chloe was a 22-year-old girl with auburn hair tied up in a loose bun. She wore faded denim overalls over a grey t-shirt, and her hands were rough from years of scrubbing kennels. She had green eyes that often held a quiet sadness. It was a lingering shadow from the day her older brother Daniel died in military service 3 years ago. Daniel was the one who taught her how to care for abandoned dogs when they were kids. Around her neck, Chloe wore a silver chain holding a metal pendant. Whenever she shifted her weight, the silver pieces clinked together. It produced a soft melodic sound that echoed lightly in the hallway. That little sound was her daily anchor. It reminded her of the brother who had taught her to love broken creatures. Right now, she needed all the courage that memory could provide, because inside cage number 4 was the most broken creature this shelter had ever seen. His name was Titan. He was a massive German shepherd, easily weighing over 90 pounds, though his ribs showed through his coat. His dark fur was matted, ruined by jagged scars that crisscrossed his sides and ran down his snout. He did not look like a normal household pet. He looked like a weary survivor of a war nobody wanted to talk about. The rest of the shelter staff were terrified of him. Whenever anyone approached the iron bars of his cage, Titan would lunge forward with terrifying speed. He would bare his teeth and let out a guttural snarl that physically shook the floorboards. Because of his extreme aggression, the shelter management had placed him in strict isolation. He was officially labelled a danger to society and was placed on the euthanasia list for the end of the week. But Chloe saw something entirely different. While the other workers saw a monster, Chloe looked past the teeth and looked deeply into his frantic brown eyes. She saw absolute terror. She knew he was not acting out of malice. He was acting out of a desperate need to survive in a world that had shown him no mercy. "Hey, big guy," Chloe whispered. Her voice was steady and calm. She made sure not to make any sudden movements. She slowly lowered herself to the cold floor and sat cross-legged in front of the gate. "I brought you the good stuff today. Extra chicken for breakfast. I know the dry food tastes like cardboard." Titan responded by slamming his heavy paws against the metal gate. The iron rattled violently on its hinges. He snapped his jaws in the air, barking so loudly that Chloe's ears began to ring. Most people would have run away screaming. Chloe just stayed seated where she was and let out a patient sigh. She reached up to her chest and nervously fiddled with her silver necklace. The metal pieces clinked together. The clear sound cut right through the loud barking. Almost instantly, Titan froze in his tracks. His ears twitched forward in curiosity. The aggressive ridge of fur standing up along his spine slowly flattened down. He lowered his heavy head, his eyes locking intently onto the silver chain around Chloe's neck. He let out a low, confused whine that sounded heartbreaking. Chloe slowly slid the food bowl under the small gap at the bottom of the gate. She did not reach her hand in to pet him. She knew better than to push her luck with a traumatized animal. She just sat there in peace, letting the clinking sound of her necklace fill the quiet space as Titan cautiously approached the bowl and began to eat his meal. For a brief moment, there was a feeling of hope in the air. Then the heavy door of the isolation ward swung open with a loud bang. Chloe jumped in surprise, and Titan immediately retreated to the back corner of his cage, barking furiously at the sudden intrusion. It was Bob, the shelter manager. Bob was a middle-aged man with a receding hairline, a red face, and a tight blue polo shirt that struggled to contain his stomach. He was constantly sweating and always carried a plastic clipboard tucked under his arm. Bob hated the isolation ward, and he especially hated cage number 4. "Chloe, get away from that animal right now," Bob yelled over Titan's deafening barks. He stayed a safe distance down the hallway, refusing to step any closer to the cage. "I told you to stop treating that dangerous beast like a puppy. He is a liability to our organization. Do you know what the night staff found this morning? I found the lower hinge of his cage bent completely out of shape. He spent the entire night trying to chew and smash his way out of that door. If he gets loose, he will attack someone in this building." Chloe stood up quickly, brushing the kennel dust off her overalls. She stepped squarely in front of Titan's cage, using her own body to block Bob's view of the frightened dog. "He is just scared, Bob. He is not used to being locked up in a dark room all by himself. He makes progress every single day I work with him. Look right there. He just ate the chicken I brought him. He didn't even try to bite the bowl this time. If we just give him a little more time, I know I can calm him down. I just need more time to show him he is safe here with us." Chloe pleaded, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. She knew the strict shelter rules, but she also knew she could not let this dog die. Bob shook his head firmly and tapped his pen against the plastic clipboard. "There is no more time, Chloe. The board of directors had an emergency meeting this morning after I reported the damaged cage door. We cannot risk a lawsuit. We cannot risk the safety of our staff or the other animals in this facility. That dog is completely unhinged and beyond rehabilitation." Bob let out a heavy sigh, trying to sound sympathetic but failing. "The county vet is coming in tomorrow afternoon. We are moving his euthanasia schedule up. He will be put down tomorrow at exactly 3 o'clock. I am sorry, Chloe, but the decision is final. Do not go near that cage again today." The words hit Chloe like a physical blow to the chest. Tomorrow afternoon. That gave her less than 24 hours to save a life. "You cannot do this to him," Chloe shouted, her usual polite demeanor vanishing entirely. "He has only been here for 4 days. You cannot give up on a life after 4 days. He just needs a proper behavioral specialist. He just needs someone to trust him." Bob turned his back and walked briskly toward the exit door. "The decision is final, Chloe. Clean up the bowls and get back to the main lobby right now." The heavy door slammed shut behind him, leaving Chloe completely alone in the dim light. She slowly turned around and looked back at Titan. The massive dog was sitting in the corner, his eyes wide and watching her every move. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Chloe pressed her hands against the cold iron bars, warm tears blurring her vision. She let her forehead rest against the metal gate. As she cried, her silver necklace swayed back and forth, making that gentle clinking sound once more. Titan let out a soft whine and crept forward. He pressed his scarred snout against the bars right where Chloe's hands rested. In that quiet moment, looking into his deeply sorrowful eyes, Chloe made a silent promise. She did not know how to fix this, and she did not know who could possibly help her, but she was absolutely not going to let this dog die tomorrow. The front lobby of Sunny Pines Animal Rescue was usually a place of joyful chaos. Dogs barked happily from the adoption floor, and phones rang non-stop. Chloe stood behind the reception counter. She was organizing a stack of adoption forms, trying desperately to distract herself from the looming 3 o'clock deadline for Titan tomorrow. The cheerful atmosphere of the lobby felt entirely wrong compared to the heavy sorrow sitting in her chest. The front glass door suddenly swung open with a harsh push. The tiny welcome bell jingled wildly. The man who walked in immediately sucked the air out of the room. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. He possessed the rigid, disciplined posture of a military man. His dark hair was cut in a tight buzz. The most striking feature about him was a long, jagged scar that ran down his right cheekbone. He wore dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt that barely contained his muscular build. This was Marcus. He was an active-duty Navy SEAL, though he carried no official uniform today. His dark eyes darted around the room with intense, calculated precision. He did not look like someone looking for a cute puppy. He looked like a man preparing to breach a hostile compound. He marched directly toward the front desk. Bob, the shelter manager, nervously adjusted his blue polo shirt and stepped forward to greet him. "Can I help you, sir?" Bob asked, his voice lacking its usual authority. Marcus placed both his hands flat on the counter. His knuckles were pale. "You have a German Shepherd in your isolation ward," Marcus stated. His voice was deep and commanded absolute attention. "Dark coat. Multiple scars. Found wandering near the highway 4 days ago. I am here to take him home. Now." Bob blinked in surprise and grabbed his plastic clipboard. He flipped through a few pages, his face turning red again. "I assume you mean cage number 4. Look, mister, I do not know how you got that information, but that animal is not up for public adoption. He is highly aggressive. He has attempted to bite 3 of my staff members. State regulations strictly forbid us from releasing an animal with a violent history to the public. He is scheduled for euthanasia tomorrow." Marcus did not flinch, but Chloe noticed his jaw clench so tightly that a muscle twitched near his scar. He leaned closer to Bob. "He is not an aggressive stray. He is highly trained. I just need you to open that cage and let me walk him out of here. Name your adoption fee. I will double it." Bob shook his head and took a step back. "It does not work like that. If he is your dog, you need to provide immediate proof of ownership, vet records, registration papers, microchip documentation. Anything." Marcus paused. A flicker of sheer desperation crossed his cold features. "I cannot give you those papers," he replied quietly. "The documents are classified under military security protocols. It is a complicated situation with my deployment, but he belongs with me." Bob let out a mocking laugh. "Classified? Right. Listen, buddy. You cannot just walk in here, claim a dangerous dog with some fake military excuse, and expect me to break state law. I am going to ask you to leave my shelter right now. If you do not walk out that door, I am calling the police." Chloe watched the entire exchange from the filing cabinets. She noticed something that Bob completely missed. While Marcus looked incredibly intimidating, his right hand was trembling slightly against the countertop. It was a tiny crack in his unbreakable armor. He was not here to cause trouble. He was here because he was terrified of losing something important. "You do not understand," Marcus argued, his voice rising in volume. He slammed his hand hard against the desk, making Bob jump. "If you put that dog down, you're killing a soldier. You have to let me see him." Bob immediately grabbed the landline phone and dialed emergency services. "Yes. Hello. I need officers at Sunny Pines Rescue. We have a hostile individual threatening staff." Marcus swore under his breath and stepped away from the counter. At that exact moment, the distant wail of police sirens began to echo down the street. They were likely responding to a different call nearby, but the sound pierced through the shelter walls. The reaction was instantaneous. From the back hallway, a terrifying sound erupted. Titan had heard the sirens. The massive dog began to roar and thrash violently against his iron cage. The heavy thuds of his body slamming into the metal door echoed all the way to the front lobby. Bob dropped the phone in panic. Marcus did not hesitate. He ignored Bob completely and sprinted past the reception desk, heading straight down the forbidden hallway toward the isolation ward. Chloe ran after him, her silver necklace clinking softly against her chest. Marcus reached the small glass window on the heavy door of the isolation ward. He pressed his hands against the glass, looking into the dim room. Titan was a blur of teeth and fury, tearing at his cage as the sirens grew louder outside. Then the impossible happened. Titan turned his head and locked eyes with the scarred man staring through the glass. The dog froze in mid-air. The deafening barks stopped instantly. Titan dropped to the concrete floor, his massive body trembling violently. He let out a soft, high-pitched whine and pressed his nose against the iron bars, looking at Marcus with desperate recognition. Chloe gasped softly behind Marcus. She had spent 4 days trying to calm that dog, and this stranger had done it with just a single glance. Marcus pressed his forehead against the glass, his eyes squeezed shut in obvious pain. "I am here, buddy," he whispered, though the dog could not possibly hear him through the heavy door. "I am right here." A moment later, 2 local police officers burst into the front lobby. Bob immediately pointed toward the hallway. "That is him. He breached a restricted area." Marcus opened his eyes and let out a defeated sigh. He knew he could not fight the police without risking his military career and losing any chance to save Titan. He turned around, his face an emotionless mask once again, and calmly walked toward the officers. After a brief discussion, the police escorted Marcus out of the building. Bob locked the front doors with a smug look on his face. Chloe stood in the hallway, her heart pounding furiously. She looked back at the isolation door, then looked toward the employee exit at the back of the building. She made a reckless decision. Chloe grabbed her keys, pushed open the back door, and sprinted through the damp grass toward the parking lot. She reached the edge of the parking lot just as Marcus was unlocking a battered black Jeep. "Wait!" Chloe yelled, waving her hands. Marcus stopped and turned around. His eyes were cold and guarded. "The manager sent you to make sure I am gone?" he asked bitterly. Chloe shook her head, trying to catch her breath. "No. Bob does not know I'm out here. I saw what happened back there. I saw how he looked at you. That dog trusts you." Marcus studied her face for a long moment, noting the faded overalls and the quiet sadness in her green eyes. "He's running out of time," Marcus said, his voice raw with hidden emotion. "They are going to kill him tomorrow. I have to get him out tonight." Chloe looked around nervously to make sure nobody was watching them. She stepped closer to the tall soldier. "The shelter security system has a blind spot near the side alley," she whispered quickly. "I have the keys to the isolation ward. Come back tonight at midnight, park 2 streets over and walk to the side door. I will let you in." Marcus looked deeply surprised. "Why would you risk your job for a stranger?" Chloe reached up and touched her silver necklace. It gave a soft clink. "Because I know what it looks like when someone loses their best friend. Midnight. Do not be late." The midnight air was biting cold as Chloe stood in the narrow alleyway beside the Sunny Pines Animal Rescue Building. She rubbed her arms over her thick woolen sweater and checked her phone screen for the 5th time. Exactly at midnight, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the adjacent street. Marcus moved with completely silent footsteps. He wore a dark tactical jacket and a black beanie pulled low over his forehead. He looked less like a man arriving to adopt a dog and more like a covert operative preparing to infiltrate an enemy base. Chloe held up a finger to her lips, signaling for absolute silence, and carefully turned the brass key in the side door lock. The metal mechanism clicked softly, and she pushed the heavy door open just enough for him to slip inside. The shelter was eerily quiet at this hour, completely devoid of the chaotic barking that filled the daytime shifts. Only the low hum of the fluorescent emergency lights and the occasional shifting of sleeping animals broke the stillness. Marcus stepped into the dim hallway and immediately scanned the perimeter with practiced efficiency. "You actually showed up," Chloe whispered, leading the way toward the restricted isolation ward. Marcus gave a small, humorless smile. "I told you I would. Navy SEALs do not miss their extraction windows, especially when a teammate is left behind." Chloe found his intensity both intimidating and slightly amusing. "Well, Mr. SEAL, just remember we are breaking shelter rules, not stealing government secrets, so let us try not to wake up the grumpy cats in the next room." Marcus nodded, his eyes locked on the heavy iron door at the end of the hall. Every time Chloe took a step, the silver pendant on her necklace swayed. The pieces of metal struck each other, producing a gentle, rhythmic clinking sound. The noise echoed lightly against the concrete walls. Suddenly, Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. His broad shoulders went completely rigid. He squeezed his eyes shut and let out a sharp, ragged breath. Chloe turned around, noticing that his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Marcus swallowed hard, forcing his eyes open and shaking his head as if clearing away a nightmare. "I'm fine. Just keep moving. We do not have much time." Chloe did not push the issue, but she recognized that haunted look. She had seen it in her brother's eyes after his first tour overseas. It was the heavy burden of memories that refused to stay buried. They reached the isolation ward, and Chloe keyed the security pad, holding her breath until the green light blinked. She pushed the heavy door open, revealing the row of dimly lit cages. Inside cage number 4, Titan was pacing restlessly. The moment he smelled Marcus, the massive German shepherd froze. He let out a desperate, high-pitched whine and pressed his scarred face against the iron bars. Marcus immediately dropped to one knee. He did not reach out to pet the dog with soft affection. Instead, his voice became sharp, authoritative, and completely devoid of warmth. "Sit! Stay!" Marcus commanded loudly, pointing a firm finger at the concrete floor. Titan flinched at the harsh tone. The dog lowered his back legs into a trembling sit, but his eyes were wide with anxiety, darting frantically around the dark room. Marcus pulled a heavy-duty nylon slip lead from his jacket pocket and reached through the slightly bent bars of the cage door to loop it around the dog's neck. "He needs discipline to snap out of this panic," Marcus stated, pulling the leash slightly tight. "If he thinks he is in charge, he will stay defensive. We have to establish dominance." Chloe felt a surge of anger and immediately grabbed Marcus by the wrist, stopping him from pulling the leash any further. "Stop it right now," she hissed, her green eyes flashing with fierce protectiveness. "He is not a new recruit at boot camp. He is terrified. You cannot bully a traumatized animal into trusting you. Look at him, Marcus. He is shaking." Marcus glared at her, his jaw set in stubborn defiance. This is how he was trained. This is what he knows. Softness will just confuse him. Chloe let go of his wrist and knelt down directly in front of the cage. "Softness is exactly what he needs to heal," she argued gently. She reached up and deliberately fiddled with her silver necklace. The metal clinked together in the quiet room. At the sound, Titan's ears perked up, the tension visibly drained from his muscular body. He ignored the nylon leash entirely and shuffled forward, pressing his cold nose against the bars right where Chloe was sitting. He let out a soft sigh, seeking comfort rather than orders. Marcus watched this interaction with wide eyes, completely baffled by how easily this young shelter worker could disarm a highly aggressive military working dog just by existing near him. "You are treating him like a fragile glass toy," Marcus muttered defensively, though his harsh tone had completely vanished. "And you are treating him like a weapon that forgot how to fire?" Chloe replied softly, not taking her eyes off the gentle giant behind the bars. Before Marcus could formulate a response, a terrifying sound shattered the quiet atmosphere of the isolation ward. In cage number 5, right next to Titan, resided a massive, heavily scarred stray mastiff mix. The animal control officers had brought this dangerous stray in just yesterday after it attacked a fence. The shelter maintenance team had not properly secured the latch on cage 5 after the evening feeding. Driven into a sudden frenzy by the presence of strangers in the dark room, the mastiff threw its entire 90-pound weight against the loose metal door. The latch gave way with a loud snap. The heavy cage door swung open, and the stray dog lunged out into the narrow hallway, its teeth bared and spit flying from its jaws. It locked its furious eyes directly on Chloe, who was kneeling helplessly on the floor with her back completely exposed. "Chloe, move!" Marcus roared, leaping forward to intercept the attacking animal, but he was a fraction of a second too late. The mastiff leaped into the air, aiming straight for Chloe. In that exact fraction of a second, an explosion of pure fury erupted from cage number 4. Titan did not wait for a command. With a terrifying surge of raw power, he snapped the nylon slip lead right out of Marcus's hand. He threw his massive shoulders against the already damaged iron hinges of his own cage door. The metal shrieked and bent outward. Titan burst into the hallway like a dark missile. He collided with the attacking mastiff in mid-air, slamming the heavier dog hard against the concrete wall. The sound of snarling and snapping jaws filled the tiny space. Marcus scrambled to his feet. "Titan, back down! Heel! Leave it!" Marcus shouted his strict military commands at the top of his lungs, trying to regain control of the chaotic situation. But Titan completely ignored the man he had once followed blindly into battle. The German shepherd placed himself squarely between the recovering mastiff and the terrified girl on the floor. Titan lowered his head, his back legs planted firmly, and let out a demonic echoing roar that vibrated through the floorboards. It was not a warning. It was a promise of absolute destruction if the stray took one more step toward Chloe. The mastiff scrambled backward, thoroughly intimidated by the overwhelming protective rage of the shepherd, and retreated into its own cage. Marcus quickly slammed the door of cage 5 shut and secured the lock. He turned around, his chest heaving, expecting Titan to be in an uncontrollable frenzy. Instead, Titan was standing completely still over Chloe. He was gently nudging her trembling shoulder with his wet nose, checking to make sure she was safe. Marcus stared at the dog, then looked down at Chloe, finally realizing that she was right. Titan was no longer just a soldier following cold orders. He had found something worth protecting with his own heart. The morning sun brought a renewed sense of purpose to the Sunny Pines Animal Rescue. Chloe stood inside the cramped office of Bob, the shelter manager, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee. Bob was already sweating in his blue polo shirt, glaring at the incident report on his desk. Chloe explained the events of the previous night, carefully leaving Marcus completely out of the story. She detailed how the mastiff from cage 5 had broken its faulty latch, and how Titan had broken out of his own cage solely to protect her. "He is not a mindless killer, Bob," Chloe insisted firmly. "If he wanted to hurt people, he would have attacked me. Instead, he placed himself between me and a 90-pound aggressive stray. That proves he has protective instincts and can be rehabilitated." Bob rubbed his temples, clearly stressed by the liability nightmare of broken cages and near attacks. Chloe recognized his hesitation and pressed her advantage. She casually mentioned that the board of directors might be very upset to hear about the faulty latch on cage 5 that endangered an employee. Bob paled slightly at the subtle threat. Grumbling under his breath, he finally picked up his red pen and crossed out the 3 o'clock euthanasia appointment for Titan. He granted Chloe exactly 1 week to show significant behavioral improvement, or the dog would be put down. Chloe walked out of the office and let out a massive breath of relief. She immediately headed to the fenced backyard of the shelter, where Marcus was already waiting. He wore a faded grey hoodie today, looking slightly less like a covert operative and more like a weary civilian. He had officially signed up as a volunteer dog walker to gain legitimate access to the facility. The grassy enclosure behind the main building was quiet, surrounded by tall chain-link fences that kept the shelter isolated from the busy suburban street. Marcus and Chloe spent the next few hours working with Titan under the warm morning sun. Marcus slowly dropped his cold military exterior. He realized that barking harsh orders only made the German Shepherd anxious. Instead, he started teaching Chloe the subtle art of animal control. He showed her how to read the tension in the dog's shoulders and how to use body language to project calm authority rather than aggression. "You have to lead from the front, but keep your energy grounded," Marcus explained, demonstrating how to hold the leash loosely. Titan trotted beside him, looking much more relaxed in the open air. The dog occasionally nudged Chloe's hand, seeking the familiar clink of her silver necklace. There was a surprising amount of humor in their awkward dynamic. Marcus tried to maintain a serious, stoic face, but he could not hide a small smile when Titan completely ignored a strict command to sit and instead rolled over onto his back, begging Chloe for belly rubs. "He is definitely losing his edge," Marcus joked dryly, shaking his head at the massive dog acting like a playful puppy. Chloe laughed, a bright and genuine sound that made Marcus pause and look at her with quiet appreciation. After an hour of intense training, they sat down on the patchy grass near the fence to rest. Chloe handed Marcus a bottle of water. She reached up to adjust her collar, and the silver pendant on her neck clinked softly. Marcus watched the metal pieces sway. "You always play with that necklace when you are nervous or thinking," he noted quietly. Chloe looked down at the silver chain, her smile fading into a gentle, nostalgic expression. "It belonged to my older brother," she said softly. "His name was Daniel. He was the one who taught me everything I know about dogs. We used to bring home every stray puppy we found in the neighborhood. He always said that broken things just need a little extra time to heal." Marcus took a slow sip of water, his dark eyes fixed on the grass. "He sounds like a good man. Does he visit the shelter often?" Chloe shook her head, tracing the edge of the pendant with her thumb. "He passed away 3 years ago. He was deployed overseas with the military. He never came back." The air between them grew suddenly heavy. Marcus stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. His entire body went rigid, and the color slowly drained from his face, making the jagged scar on his cheek stand out sharply. "Daniel!" Marcus repeated the name, his voice barely a whisper, sounding as if the word tasted like ash in his mouth. He looked at the silver necklace again, his eyes widening with a terrible, silent realization, but he clamped his jaw shut and chose to remain silent. Chloe noticed his sudden discomfort, but assumed he was just respectfully sympathizing with her loss. She opened her mouth to change the subject, but she never got the chance. Out on the main road beyond the shelter's fence, a massive city garbage truck rumbled down the asphalt. Gary, a tired sanitation worker in a neon vest, was driving the heavy vehicle way too fast over a section of broken pavement. As the truck hit a deep pothole, the enormous rear tire suffered a catastrophic blowout. The resulting explosion was deafening. Bang! The sound ripped through the quiet suburban air with terrifying violence. To Chloe, it was just a loud, startling noise of a popped tire. But to Titan and Marcus, that exact acoustic frequency was the sound of an improvised explosive device detonating in a dusty desert. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Titan let out a frantic yelp. Driven completely blind by sudden panic and severe PTSD, the massive German Shepherd snapped his jaws at the nearest moving object. His teeth sank hard into Marcus's left forearm. Chloe screamed, terrified by the sudden violence. But Marcus did not shout in pain. He did not even seem to register that the dog's teeth were tearing into his flesh. The loud explosion had shattered his fragile mental walls. Marcus collapsed onto the grass, his eyes wide and unseeing. He ripped his arm away from Titan, not out of pain, but to throw both hands over his head in a defensive posture. He curled into a tight ball on the ground, gasping desperately for air that his lungs refused to take in. He was no longer in the sunny backyard of an animal shelter. In his mind, he was back in the burning sands, surrounded by the deafening roar of combat, choking on thick smoke and the metallic smell of blood. Titan, realizing what he had done, let go of the arm and retreated to the corner of the fence, whining in absolute terror. Chloe dropped to her knees beside the trembling soldier, completely ignoring the blood soaking through his grey hoodie. The peaceful morning had vanished, replaced by the chaotic, invisible ghosts of a war that had followed both the man and the dog all the way home. Chloe did not hesitate for a single second. The loud bang of the blown tire still echoed terribly in the distance, but her entire focus was on the bleeding soldier curled on the grass. She dropped to her knees beside Marcus and grabbed his uninjured shoulder, pulling him firmly behind the thick wooden wall of the storage shed so nobody from the main building would see them in this vulnerable state. "Marcus, look at me," she ordered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the chaotic situation. "You are in the backyard of Sunny Pines Animal Rescue. You are safe. There is no danger here. Nobody is shooting at you." She repeated the comforting words like a continuous mantra while ripping the sleeve of her own denim overalls to press against the bleeding bite wound on his left forearm. Marcus gasped desperately for air, his dark eyes wide and completely detached from reality. He was locked in a horrific flashback, his body trembling violently against the damp grass. It took 2 full minutes of Chloe maintaining firm pressure on his arm and speaking in a calm, grounding tone before the glassy, haunted look in his eyes finally shattered. He blinked rapidly, the bright suburban sunlight suddenly returning to his vision. He looked down at his bleeding arm, then up at Chloe's pale but fiercely determined face. "I am sorry," Marcus whispered hoarsely, pulling his arm away to inspect the physical damage. The bite was deep and painful, but it thankfully missed any major arteries. It was a defensive strike, born of sheer animalistic terror rather than actual aggression. Chloe let out a shaky breath and wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead. "Do not apologize to me. Just breathe normally. I have a first aid kit inside the shed." She quickly retrieved the white plastic medical box and began cleaning the fresh wound with antiseptic wipes. Marcus gritted his teeth at the stinging pain, but remained perfectly still, his stoic military training kicking back in to successfully mask his vulnerability. He watched her work quietly, noting how surprisingly gentle her hands were despite the adrenaline visibly coursing through her veins. "You handle panic situations very well for a civilian," he noted quietly, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. Chloe offered a small, sad smile while securing the white bandage. "When you work with broken animals long enough, you learn very quickly that panicking right back never solves anything. You have to be the anchor." Once the thick bandage was securely wrapped around his muscular arm, Chloe turned her attention to the far corner of the fenced yard. Titan was pressed tightly against the chain-link fence, his massive body curled into a tight ball of pure misery. He let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper, fully expecting to be punished severely for his sudden violent outburst. Marcus started to stand up to discipline the dog, but Chloe placed a firm hand flat against his chest, stopping him completely in his tracks. "Let me handle this," she said, softly, but firmly. She walked slowly toward the terrified German shepherd, dropping to her knees a few feet away. She did not reach out to pet him, knowing that physical touch might trigger another panic response. Instead, she sat down cross-legged on the grass and simply existed in his immediate space. She reached up to her chest and began to fiddle deliberately with her silver necklace. The metal pieces clinked together, creating that familiar rhythmic sound. Clink, clink, clink. The soft noise easily cut through Titan's blinding panic. The massive dog slowly lifted his heavy head, his ears twitching forward with desperate hope. He recognized that specific sound. It was the exact sound in this loud, confusing world that meant absolute safety and comfort. Titan began to army crawl across the grass, his belly scraping the dirt until he finally reached Chloe. He pressed his heavily scarred snout directly into her lap and let out a long, exhausted sigh. Chloe wrapped her arms gently around his thick neck, burying her face securely in his dark fur, completely ignoring the dirt and the potential danger. Marcus watched the beautiful scene unfold from the shadow of the storage shed, feeling a strange, unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He realized with sudden clarity that both he and this magnificent dog were fundamentally shattered by the exact same war, and this young girl with a simple silver necklace was somehow acting as the miraculous glue holding them both together. After a long moment of quiet comfort, Marcus finally walked over and sat down heavily on the grass next to them. Titan tensed slightly at his approach, but did not attempt to run away. Marcus looked at the dog, then looked directly at Chloe. "He responds much better to German commands," Marcus said quietly, deciding to finally share a small piece of his hidden military world with her. Military working dogs are often trained extensively in foreign languages, so enemy combatants cannot easily give them counter orders during chaotic combat situations. Chloe looked up from the dog, genuinely intrigued by this new information. "Teach me how to speak to him," she requested eagerly. Marcus nodded slightly and pointed a steady finger at the grassy ground. "Sitz means sit down. Platz means lay down flat. Higher means come right here to me." Chloe repeated the foreign words carefully, her accent slightly clumsy, but her tone full of undeniable warmth. "Sitz, Titan," she commanded softly, gesturing with her hand. The massive German shepherd immediately adjusted his posture, sitting up tall and proud despite his lingering anxiety from the loud noise earlier. Chloe laughed brightly, the joyful sound bringing a rare, completely genuine smile to Marcus's face. They spent the next hour practicing the various commands, miraculously turning the stressful morning into a surprisingly peaceful bonding session. The heavy burden of their shared trauma seemed to lighten significantly under the warm morning sun, replaced by a quiet, unspoken understanding between two very different people. Marcus found himself relaxing his guard in a way he had not experienced in several years. He even managed to joke dryly about Titan's terrible table manners when Chloe pulled some hidden dog treats from her deep pockets. The air between the three of them felt incredibly easy, almost like they were a real family spending a lazy Sunday afternoon in the local park. But peace was always a fragile thing in their lives, and theirs was about exactly to shatter completely. Titan was feeling unusually playful, which was a huge psychological step forward in his rehabilitation journey. He excitedly nudged Chloe's arm, asking eagerly for more treats, and suddenly jumped up to playfully bat at her shoulder with his heavy front paw. He was clumsy and uncoordinated in his excitement. One of his sharp, unclipped claws accidentally hooked directly onto the delicate silver chain resting around Chloe's neck. Before anyone could react to stop him, the dog pulled his heavy paw back down to the ground. The silver chain snapped instantly with a sharp, metallic ping. Chloe gasped loudly as the broken necklace ripped away from her skin. The small silver locket attached to the chain hit the ground hard. The violent impact popped the tiny metal clasp open immediately. The locket spilled its carefully hidden contents right onto the green grass. It was not just a simple piece of jewelry as Marcus had previously assumed. Two miniature military dog tags clattered loudly against the dirt, securely attached to a tiny, folded color photograph. Marcus immediately reached out his good hand to help gather the broken pieces for her. His rough fingers brushed against the small metal tags, and his dark eyes fell upon the tiny photograph that had tumbled out onto the grass. It was a picture of a young soldier wearing a desert camouflage uniform, smiling brightly under the harsh Middle Eastern sun. Marcus stopped breathing completely. His entire muscular body froze solid as if struck by lightning. He slowly picked up the tiny metal dog tags, his hands suddenly trembling so violently he could barely focus enough to read the stamped letters. But he did not need to read them. He knew exactly whose name was permanently pressed into that cold metal. Daniel Evans, United States Army, blood, type O, positive. Marcus stared in absolute horror at the smiling face in the photograph, the exact same face that had haunted his worst nightmares every single night for the past 3 agonizing years. The sound of Chloe's necklace, the soft clinking noise that instantly calmed Titan down every time he panicked, it was not just a random metallic sound. It was the exact sound of Daniel's dog tags swaying against his chest armor while he walked bravely through the desert. It was the sound of the man who had selflessly died to save them both. Marcus dropped the tags as if they physically burned his skin. He fell backward onto the grass, his broad chest heaving desperately for air as hot tears completely flooded his eyes, leaving Chloe staring at him in absolute terrifying confusion as her entire world shifted. The silence in the backyard of Sunny Pines Animal Rescue was suddenly heavier than a physical weight. Chloe knelt on the damp grass, her trembling hands reaching out to retrieve the small metal dog tags that Marcus had just dropped as if they were made of burning coal. She looked at the tall, heavily scarred soldier sitting rigidly before her. His dark eyes were wide with a terror she had never seen in him, not even when the garbage truck tire had exploded just an hour ago. The color had completely vanished from his face. He stared at the tiny photograph of Daniel, her smiling older brother, and his broad chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. "Marcus, what is wrong with you?" Chloe asked, her voice shaking with confusion and a rising sense of dread. She clutched the broken silver chain to her chest. "Why are you looking at my brother like that?" Marcus closed his eyes tight, a single tear escaping and tracking down his jagged facial scar. He let out a ragged breath, the sound tearing through the quiet suburban morning. "His name was Daniel Evans," Marcus whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking under the unbearable weight of a 3-year-old secret. "He was a private first class, and he was the bravest man I ever had the honor of serving with." Chloe stopped breathing. Her green eyes widened in absolute shock. The gentle morning breeze suddenly felt freezing cold against her skin. "You knew him," she gasped, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the small metal tags. Marcus slowly opened his eyes, and the sheer volume of guilt swimming in his dark gaze made Chloe physically recoil. "I did not just know him, Chloe," Marcus confessed, his voice dropping to a painful rasp. "We were in the same unit. We ate together, we trained together, and we deployed together to a small hellhole in the Middle East." He looked over at Titan, who was currently sitting quietly near the chain-link fence, his ears pinned back as he sensed the overwhelming emotional distress radiating from the two humans. Titan was not just a random stray I found wandering near the highway. He is a highly decorated military working dog. He was my partner, but Daniel loved him just as much. Daniel used to sneak him extra rations from the mess hall. Every time Daniel walked into the barracks, his dog tags would clink together against his tactical vest. Titan learned that specific sound. To him, that sound meant safety, food, and absolute kindness in a world made entirely of sand and violence. The puzzle pieces violently slammed together in Chloe's mind. The reason Titan instantly calmed down whenever she fiddled with her silver necklace was not some magical dog whisperer trick. It was the acoustic ghost of her dead brother. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train, knocking the breath from her lungs. But Marcus was not finished, and the worst part of the truth was still buried in the desert sand. "We were clearing a compound," Marcus continued, his eyes glazing over as the horrific memory pulled him back to that dusty afternoon. "It was supposed to be a routine sweep, but we walked into an ambush. A delayed explosive device was thrown directly into our clearing. It landed right between me and Titan. I was completely frozen. I did not have the reaction time to move." Marcus paused, his hands shaking so violently he had to press them flat against the grass to steady himself. Daniel did not hesitate for a single second. He sprinted forward, shoved me and the dog backward, and threw his own body directly over the explosive just as it detonated. A sharp, agonizing sob ripped from Chloe's throat. She pressed her hands over her mouth, her entire body shaking as the gruesome image of her brother's final moments painted itself vividly in her mind. For 3 years, the military had simply told her family that Daniel died honorably in action. They had never provided the brutal, selfless details of his sacrifice. "He saved us," Marcus choked out, burying his face in his hands. "He gave his life so a broken soldier and a dog could come home. But the explosion was catastrophic. The medical evacuation was complete chaos. In the confusion, Titan was loaded onto the wrong transport helicopter. Due to massive paperwork errors and his lack of a proper civilian microchip, the military lost track of him in the system. I have spent the last 3 years searching every shelter in this state to find him." Marcus looked up, his eyes begging for a forgiveness he felt he did not deserve. "When I walked into this shelter and saw your necklace, I did not know who you were. I swear to you, Chloe, I did not know you were Daniel's little sister until this exact moment." But Chloe could not hear his desperate apologies. The grief she had carefully buried for 3 years erupted into blinding, fiery anger. She scrambled backward on the grass, putting as much distance between herself and Marcus as possible. "You brought him here," she cried, her voice echoing painfully against the shelter walls. "You brought his death right to my feet. You sat there all morning, letting me talk about my brother, and you were the reason he never came home." She pushed herself up to her feet, her legs trembling weakly. She pointed a shaking finger at the wounded soldier. "You should have told me the truth the second you realized who he was to you. You used me to get to the dog." Marcus stood up slowly, holding his bleeding arm, his face completely shattered by her accusations. "Chloe, please, I just figured it out." He tried to explain, but she cut him off with a fierce shake of her head. "Stay away from me," she sobbed, tears streaming freely down her face. "Just take your dog and stay away from me." The emotional confrontation reached its absolute breaking point, but the universe had one more cruel twist waiting for them. The heavy iron gate of the backyard suddenly rattled violently and swung open. A group of 4 sharply dressed individuals marched onto the grass. They were the Sunny Pines Animal Rescue Board of Directors. Leading the group was Mrs. Higgins, a tall, severe-looking woman in her late 50s with tight grey hair and a perfectly pressed navy blue business suit. She carried a thick leather binder and wore an expression of absolute disgust. The shelter manager, Bob, trailed nervously behind her, his face pale with panic. Mrs. Higgins stopped dead in her tracks, her sharp eyes rapidly taking in the chaotic scene. She saw a strange man standing in the restricted training yard with a heavily bleeding bite wound on his arm. She saw a weeping employee. And she saw the massive, deeply scarred German shepherd standing off-leash near the fence, the exact dog that was supposed to be securely locked in the isolation ward. "What in the world is going on here?" Mrs. Higgins demanded, her voice cutting through the emotional tension like a sharp blade. Bob scrambled forward, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus and Titan. I told you, Mrs. Higgins. Chloe took the dangerous animal out without authorization. Mrs. Higgins adjusted her glasses, glaring coldly at the blood soaking through Marcus's bandage. Is that a fresh dog bite on your arm, sir? She asked sharply. Marcus instinctively stepped in front of Titan to shield the dog from the woman's hostile gaze. It was an accident, Marcus stated firmly, trying to regain his military composure. A loud noise triggered a panic response. He's not aggressive. He is just scared. But Mrs. Higgins had already heard enough. She turned to Bob and snapped her binder shut with a loud, final crack. This is exactly the kind of liability nightmare we were discussing in the board meeting. An unauthorized civilian has been severely bitten by a known aggressive stray on shelter property. The risk of a massive lawsuit is catastrophic. Chloe wiped her tears desperately and stepped forward, trying to salvage the disaster. Mrs. Higgins, please, you do not understand. This dog is a military veteran. He was just startled. Mrs. Higgins held up a manicured hand, silencing Chloe instantly. I do not care if he is the president's personal pet. He has drawn human blood. There will be no more delays, Bob. Call the county veterinarian immediately. That dog will be euthanized today by 5 o'clock this afternoon. And as for you, Chloe, pack your belongings. You are officially fired. The finality of her words hung in the air, a death sentence delivered with cold, bureaucratic efficiency, leaving Marcus and Chloe completely paralyzed as the clock began to aggressively tick down on Titan's life. The afternoon sun cast long, grim shadows across the parking lot of Sunny Pines Animal Rescue. The situation had escalated with terrifying speed. Following Mrs. Higgins's strict orders, local law enforcement had been called to escort Marcus off the property. 2 police officers stood firm at the main gate, ensuring the tall, scarred soldier could not step back onto the premises. Inside the building, Bob had practically shoved Chloe into his cramped managerial office and locked the heavy wooden door from the outside. He told her to pack her personal belongings and wait for her final paperwork. But Chloe was not packing. She was pacing the small room like a caged tiger. Through the thin walls, she could hear the chaotic sounds echoing from the isolation ward. 4 specialized animal control officers had just arrived. Leading the grim squad was Officer Miller, a burly man with a thick gray mustache who carried a heavy metal catchpole. Beside him stood Officer Davis, a nervous young rookie whose hands shook as he gripped a black stun baton. They were marching down the hallway toward cage number 4. Titan knew exactly what was coming. The massive German Shepherd could smell the sharp, metallic scent of fear and the sterile stench of the lethal injection vials. He did not cower in the corner this time. He threw his 90-pound body violently against the iron bars, roaring with the fury of a trapped soldier. His teeth clamped down hard on the metal mesh, causing his gums to bleed, but he refused to back down. Chloe pressed her hands against her ears, unable to bear the agonizing sounds of Titan fighting for his life. She looked around the tiny office in pure desperation. Her green eyes locked onto the small, reinforced glass window that looked out into the side alley. It was her only way out. Without a second thought about the consequences, Chloe grabbed Bob's heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall bracket. She swung the red cylinder backward and smashed it directly into the center of the window. The thick glass cracked loudly. She swung it again and again until the pane finally shattered into jagged pieces. Chloe hoisted herself up onto the windowsill. She squeezed her body through the tight frame, completely ignoring the sharp shards of glass that sliced deeply into the palms of her hands and tore the fabric of her denim overalls. She hit the asphalt of the alleyway hard, ignoring the stinging pain in her bleeding hands, and immediately sprinted toward the back entrance of the shelter. Meanwhile, out on the main street, Marcus was fighting his own desperate battle. He stood next to his battered black Jeep, his military mind calculating impossible variables. He pulled a heavy, encrypted satellite phone from his tactical jacket. He dialed a highly classified 12-digit number that he was only supposed to use for extreme international emergencies. The line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. It was General Vance, a stern, silver-haired commander stationed at the Pentagon who had overseen Marcus's unit for the past decade. Marcus did not waste a single second on pleasantries. He rapidly explained the dire situation at the civilian animal shelter. He detailed the horrific paperwork error that had lost a decorated military asset. Most importantly, he spoke the name Daniel Evans. He explained that the dog currently fighting for his life in a concrete cell was the exact same dog that Private Evans had died to protect 3 years ago. The line went completely silent for 5 agonizing seconds. General Vance knew the Evans file intimately. The weight of that sacrifice hung heavily over the entire command. When the general finally spoke, his voice carried the absolute, crushing authority of the United States Department of Defense. He ordered Marcus to stand by and promised that hell would freeze over before a civilian shelter executed an American hero. Inside the isolation ward, the situation had deteriorated into absolute madness. Officer Miller had managed to loop the thick metal wire of the catchpole around Titan's neck. The massive dog thrashed wildly, choking himself as he tried to bite the metal pole. Blood dripped from his scarred snout. The county veterinarian, a pale woman in a white coat, stood nervously in the doorway. She held a large syringe filled with a fatal dose of bright green liquid. She took a hesitant step forward, waiting for the officers to pin the struggling animal to the concrete floor. At that exact moment, Chloe burst through the heavy double doors of the ward. Her hands were covered in blood from the broken window, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She did not stop to negotiate. She did not ask for permission. Chloe dove straight into cage number 4, throwing her entire body between the sharp stun batons and the terrifyingly aggressive dog. She wrapped her bleeding arms tightly around Titan's thick neck, completely shielding him with her own fragile body. The officers yelled in shock, demanding she step away. But Titan stopped fighting the very second Chloe touched him. She had hastily tied her broken silver chain back together before making her run. As she hugged the massive dog, the 2 metal dog tags swung from the shortened necklace. They clinked together right next to Titan's ear. That simple, beautiful sound cut through the violent chaos like a knife. Titan immediately dropped his aggressive posture. He let out a heartbreaking whimper and buried his bloody snout deeply into Chloe's shoulder, seeking the familiar safety of Daniel's memory. Before Officer Miller could grab Chloe's arm to pull her away, a deafening crash shook the entire building's foundation. Everyone in the isolation ward froze. Outside, tires screeched violently against the pavement. Marcus had not waited politely at the gate. Driving a massive, armored military Humvee that had just arrived from the local reserve base, he had smashed straight through the shelter's front security gates. Marcus marched down the hallway with terrifying purpose, flanked by 2 armed military police officers in full tactical gear. He held up his encrypted phone, displaying a digital, top-secret executive order bearing the seal of the Pentagon. He looked directly at the shelter manager and the terrified veterinarian. He declared loudly that the animal in cage 4 was classified federal property, and anyone who touched him would be arrested for treason. The lethal injection needle clattered uselessly onto the concrete floor. The fluorescent lights of the isolation ward flickered, casting harsh shadows over the unbelievable scene unfolding inside Sunny Pines Animal Rescue. General Vance had made good on his promise. The 2 military police officers standing behind Marcus did not look like men who were willing to negotiate with local shelter management. They wore pristine olive-drab uniforms, their faces carved from stone, completely ignoring the stunned expressions of the shelter staff. Mrs. Higgins, the usually intimidating board director, looked incredibly small as she stared at the glowing screen of Marcus's encrypted phone. The digital document displayed a top-secret executive order from the Department of Defense, officially declassifying the service record of one specific German Shepherd. The paperwork explicitly stated that the animal in cage number 4 was not an aggressive stray, but a highly decorated military asset who had been lost in a bureaucratic nightmare during a combat evacuation. Bob, the shelter manager, wiped a massive amount of sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. He looked at the heavy catch pole that Officer Miller had dropped on the concrete floor, then looked at the massive dog who was currently hiding behind Chloe's legs. I had no idea. Bob stammered weakly, his usual arrogant tone completely absent. The county animal control system just registered him as an unidentified stray. If we had known his military background, we never would have placed him on the euthanasia list. Marcus stepped forward, his dark eyes fixed coldly on the shelter manager. Ignorance is not an excuse for executing a traumatized veteran, Marcus stated, his deep voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. You will process his release papers immediately. He is coming home with me today. Mrs. Higgins practically tripped over her own expensive heels to personally grab the necessary forms from the front lobby. She returned minutes later, her hands shaking as she handed Marcus a clipboard and a pen. She offered a profusely apologetic speech about misunderstandings and promised that Chloe would receive a significant promotion and a formal apology letter from the board for her heroic actions. Chloe simply nodded, her bleeding hands carefully wrapped in temporary gauze provided by the terrified county veterinarian. She did not care about the promotion or the apologies. All she cared about was the beautiful sound of Titan letting out a long, exhausted sigh of relief as Marcus finally clipped a proper leather leash onto his collar. The nightmare was over. An hour later, the chaotic energy of the shelter had faded into the quiet hum of the suburban afternoon. Marcus, Chloe, and Titan stood in the empty back parking lot beside the battered black Jeep. The golden light of the setting sun painted the sky in warm shades of orange and purple. Chloe sat on the open tailgate of the vehicle, letting Marcus properly clean and bandage the deep glass cuts on the palms of her hands. He worked with the exact same gentle precision she had used on his arm just a few hours ago. Titan sat happily between them, his large head resting comfortably on Chloe's knee, occasionally letting out a soft snort that sounded suspiciously like a pig. He is completely ruining his tough military reputation right now, Marcus noted dryly, securing the final piece of white medical tape around Chloe's wrist. Chloe laughed, the bright sound feeling like a massive weight lifting from her chest. The anger and profound grief that had consumed her earlier had slowly washed away, replaced by a deep, clarifying understanding. She looked at the jagged scar on Marcus's cheek, then looked at the faded scars crisscrossing Titan's dark fur. Both of them carried the physical and mental evidence of the war that had taken her brother. "I was so angry at you," Chloe admitted softly, her green eyes looking directly into Marcus's dark gaze. "When you told me the truth about Daniel, I just wanted someone to blame for the fact that he never came home. But sitting in that isolation ward, watching you kick down the doors with the entire United States military behind you just to save this dog, I finally understood." Marcus stopped moving, his hands resting lightly on his knees as he listened carefully to her words. "Understood what?" he asked quietly. Chloe reached out her freshly bandaged hand and gently stroked Titan's ears. The dog leaned into her touch with absolute devotion. "I understood why Daniel made his choice," she explained, her voice steady and filled with quiet pride. "Daniel did not die for nothing, Marcus. He died to protect his family. You and Titan were his brothers in that desert. He gave up his future so the two of you could have yours. If I push you away, I am rejecting the very thing my brother sacrificed his life to save." Marcus swallowed hard, a profound sense of peace settling over his weary soul for the first time in 3 agonizing years. He did not say anything, but the look of pure gratitude in his eyes spoke volumes. The crisp autumn breeze swept quietly across the meticulously manicured green lawns of the National Cemetery 2 days later. Rows of pristine white marble headstones stretched out in perfect, endless lines toward the horizon. The setting sun cast long, peaceful shadows over the sacred ground. Marcus stood at strict attention before a specific white stone, his posture absolutely flawless. He was wearing his immaculate navy dress uniform. The dark fabric was perfectly pressed, adorned with rows of colorful ribbons and heavy gold medals that caught the fading sunlight. The uniform transformed him from a rugged, scarred survivor into a striking symbol of honor and resilience. Sitting tall and proud directly by his left leg was Titan. The massive German Shepherd was no longer wearing a cheap shelter slip lead. Instead, he wore a custom-fitted dark blue service dog vest bearing the official insignia of the military canine unit. The dog seemed to understand the solemn gravity of the location, remaining perfectly still and quiet. Chloe stood a few steps back, wearing a simple but elegant black dress. Resting against her collarbone was her repaired silver necklace. The tiny metal clasp had been fixed, securely holding the precious photograph and the 2 metal dog tags once again. As the wind blew, the pieces shifted slightly, producing that familiar, gentle clinking sound. Marcus slowly raised his right hand, snapping a crisp, perfect military salute toward the engraved name of Private First Class Daniel Evans. He held the salute for a long, quiet minute, silently delivering the ultimate promise to his fallen brother. He promised to live a good life, to protect the innocent, and to always watch over the little sister Daniel had left behind. When Marcus finally lowered his hand, the heavy burden of his survivor guilt seemed to physically lift from his broad shoulders, evaporating into the cool evening air. Chloe stepped forward, her heart completely full. She did not feel the crushing sadness that normally accompanied her visits to this cemetery. Instead, she felt incredibly safe. She reached out and gently took Marcus's strong hand in hers. He looked down at her, a genuine warm smile finally breaking through his usual stoic expression, completely changing the landscape of his scarred face. At the exact same moment, Titan shifted his weight and happily leaned his heavy body against Chloe's leg, letting out a contented sigh. The 3 broken survivors stood together in the quiet sunset, their individual tragedies successfully forged into an unbreakable bond. They were no longer lost in the dark shadows of the past. They were finally a family, ready to face whatever the future held together. The story of Marcus, Chloe, and Titan beautifully reminds us that our deepest wounds are often healed not by the passage of time, but by the love and understanding of those who share our pain. Daniel's ultimate sacrifice wasn't just a tragic end. It was a miraculous bridge that connected 3 broken souls, proving that true heroes leave behind a legacy of love that continues to save lives long after they are gone. From my perspective, this story teaches us that sometimes the very things that shatter our hearts are the exact pieces needed to make someone else whole again. We are never truly broken beyond repair as long as we have each other. May God bless you and your loved ones with the same profound peace, loyalty, and unconditional love found in this story. May He heal your hidden scars, guide you safely through your darkest storms, and surround you with compassionate people who will never give up on you when you need them the most. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope always remains. Comment Amen below if you believe in the healing power of love, sacrifice, and divine grace. And please subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you more powerful, heartwarming stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and may God's grace be with you always.
Thank you so much for being a part of our amazing community. Until next time, stay blessed, stay strong, and keep sharing the love. We'll see you in the next video.